Yeah, so as I mentioned at the beginning, this session is all about balancing another job. In our case, for the three of us here this evening, we are all also in full-time work alongside being a councillor, which presents a certain sort of set of challenges that maybe other colleagues don't have. Lots of councillors do work. Some of us work part-time, but quite a few of us these days actually do also work full-time. And I should have noted at the beginning that we are being recorded this evening so that we can share this with other people who might be unable to attend this evening. I hope you can all hear me okay. So can we have the next slide, please, Jack? Am I able to control it, Jack? Anyway, he's there. Okay. I'm going to hand over now to Jack, who's going to give him a little bit of a longer introduction to himself now.
Hi, everyone. There's a salsa class that's just began in the room next to me at the Sydenham Centre. So if you can hear salsa in the background, that is why. So yeah, just a few bits of information about me in terms of my roles and when I was elected. So I was elected in May 2021 in a by-election in Sydenham Ward. My day job is a teacher, so I'm head of economics and business, and I work full-time until September 2024. I actually now just work 4 days. Okay, so being a teacher 4 days in a school does feel like a full-time job, but full disclosure, I'm not quite full-time anymore now. I'm now 4 days, but spent quite a long time working 5 days a week alongside being a councillor. I have a couple of additional responsibilities. One of them is I chair a task and finish group about delivering affordable housing in the borough. So as you're all aware, I'm sure, we want to deliver as many affordable houses as we can do for local families. However, the context is challenging at the moment. So this group is looking at innovative new ways to try and meet that ambition. And in addition, I chair Planning Committee B, which essentially is a committee that makes decisions on whether or not to grant planning permission or not to some of the larger, perhaps more controversial developments that occur in the borough. I'm going to hand over now to Essie or Sean.
Thank you. I was elected in May 2022, and then we'll probably return to this later on, but I was blessed, or otherwise, I don't want to say cursed, but I was blessed to become chair of the Pension Investment Committee right from the beginning. So we will return to this, I think, later on about that being a decision that comes with some challenges. I have almost always worked full-time, so I'm now actually on my 4th full-time job. I've started off working as a teacher full-time over in North London. I then was a teacher in South London, actually at the same school where Jack still works. And I was a part-time teacher for a bit, and I then went and worked for a local authority, and now I work for a Labour front bencher. So it's been quite a roller coaster with a lot of different jobs, and this it was partly because trying to find something that sort of fitted in essentially with council. So different jobs have had different challenges in that regard. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that later on if you want to. And I'll hand over now to Essie.
Thank you, Sean. I was elected in May 2022 with a whole bunch of new councillors, all with very kind of different background stories, caring responsibilities, full-time workers. So it did feel a bit like I was in the same boat with a lot of other people, which made it perhaps less overwhelming than it might otherwise have been. And I found that, quite fortunate. I was a financial journalist for a long time and transitioned as I was elected to working in finance for a bank, working with the chair and the CEO of a bank on policy and comms. So that is kind of thank God also that has coincided with hybrid working. So that's been quite helpful in terms of adding flexibility. So putting those two together with my council work has been challenging at points, but it's been, worthwhile, and I have had a lot of understanding from work, and have flexibility, of course, in council work. So that's made it kind of manageable. I was a cabinet advisor for a year coming into this February, which is kind of like bridging sort of a backbench councillor and a full-time cabinet member role. It's kind of a midpoint, so it's a bit of responsibility to kind of get you used to working in that way, but it's not kind of diving straight in at the deep end. And I was working on Blashir, which is our sort of health equalities project based on the report that we did with Birmingham. So working on a project that really meant a lot to me, and getting to work with officers and getting to kind of push forward this work was really enjoyable. I did that for a year, and now I'm a cabinet member as of February, I think, for business jobs and skills. And so that has been a bit of a step up, and in terms of my kind of schedule and having to manage and having a few more meetings, and having to kind of arrange it with work. And there have been moments of challenge, but again, it's about being being flexible, about being using my time well, and trying to ask for understanding where it's needed. But it's been a very enjoyable journey. I guess I'll kick this bit off and then hand over to Sean and Jack for their input. But just kind of given that we've all spoken about our work and being a councillor, can you do both? Evidently you can, because we're doing it and we're making the most of it. And we have 3 quite different jobs in different sectors, but we're managing to make it work. As I've said, there are moments of challenge, but I've found it manageable with some flexibility on my side, on the side of councillors and officers, and also on the side of my employer. So that's been really helpful. Yeah, Sean or Jack, do you want to take the ball on that?
Yeah, I can add to that. I mean, I think you'll find a lot of people agree with that final bullet point on the slide, that I think it's really important that the council doesn't just have elected representatives that are people that are retired or those that have the means to work part-time. It needs to be, councillors need to be representative of the people of Lewisham, and perhaps a large percentage of those will be working full-time. And I've always felt like the council meeting schedule works okay to maintain a full-time job, assuming though that your full-time job is kind of standard business hours, right? I mean, as a teacher, my standard working hours are just before 8 in the morning till about 5 in the evening. I do have to do some work in the evenings in my day job. I can kind of decide when I'm doing that. And the vast majority of formal council meetings do take place after 7 or 7:30 in an evening. I mean, that is not the case in some councils across the country, where they might have like a planning committee meeting that starts at 10 a.m. So yeah, the council calendar is designed to allow people that work during the day to be councillors.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of agree with, obviously, with what both of you have said. I know, so when I first became a councillor, I also at that point had, well, I still do have 2 children, but obviously, being they were a few years younger, and I think it's a point on one of the other slides, perhaps, that you do need to be available in the evenings. So it really does depend on what responsibilities you've got. But it's also important to note that you've got some meetings that you need to be there in person, but you have other meetings that you can sometimes do online with council. So, for example, Labour Group has nearly always got an online option. And that's a very regular meeting that we have, and that's basically where all the Labour councillors are together to discuss business and policy and so on. But that, as I say, that normally has an online option, which I think certainly for me, having two teenagers at home, I found that really helpful, because it just meant that it just gives me that flexibility to be at home and, make sure they're doing their homework, or doing vaguely sensible things that they're supposed to be doing. The other thing to note is that although there is, generally speaking, an evening schedule, depending on what committee you are on, if you're chair or vice chair of a committee, sometimes there can be day meetings. Certainly with pensions, there's really a lot of day meetings that in an ideal world I would attend all of them, but in reality I can't, because they genuinely are so frequent that I absolutely cannot do all of them. So yeah, again, that's about perhaps sort of making the right choices about the committees that you're on, which I think we'll come on to on another slide. So I'll stop there because I keep doing spoilers. So this is just a sort of sample monthly calendar, just sort of to give you an idea of the sorts of things that we might be doing. Labour Group is always on a Monday at 7. And you can see the sort of variety of other meetings that you might sort of go through. These days, we're also doing campaigning on Mondays, but that can take the place of one of the Labour Group meetings, so it isn't necessarily an additional thing. It's kind of an instead of. But obviously then that does mean you don't have like the online option to do canvassing. Most of you are relatively active members. I think looking down the list, I recognise a lot of names. People sort of come out on the doorstep in various parts of the borough with us. So you know that we also do a fair amount of weekend canvassing as well, which I think we're all pretty much used to. We are also expected as councillors to attend branch meetings. And some of us will want to attend GC and things like that as well. So this is just a sort of a flavour really of what it might look like. You can generally expect to have anything from 1 to 3 evening meetings a week. I would say 3 is kind of a week where it's like, oh, that's quite a lot on this week, but that's not necessarily the norm. But most weeks I would expect to have something in at least one of the evenings. I don't know about Jack and Essie.
I think that's a fair guide. As a minimum, it tends to be one evening meeting. Yeah, on a difficult, challenging week in terms of workload, it can be 3. And I think it's important to emphasise that point that some of these meetings you can attend online, but not all of them. For example, a full council meeting, you're expected to be there. Canvassing, obviously, that's in person. Scrutiny meetings and planning committee meetings, you're expected to be there in person. So, probably about more than 50% of those, I would expect that you would be attending in person. I don't know if you agree with that, Sian or Essie.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. It's important to note for people who are not aware that you have a minimum attendance requirement to your meetings, so your scrutiny panel meetings or full council. There is an attendance requirement, and you can attend online, but that is then not registered against your attendance. So that and that's not due to council or anything like that. That's actually a legal requirement, because if you are required to vote in a meeting, you can only vote in person. There is no online option to vote in full council, scrutiny meetings, or in my case, pension committee meetings and so on. So you do need to attend those in person.
Yeah, I would agree with what both Jack and Sean have said about the need for attendance, often, not often, but for those things that have been noted, scrutiny, full council, where attendance is taken to be in person. There are hybrid options, which we are trying to move towards it being more inclusive. So there are hybrid options for some meetings, like Labour Group we've noted, but there is still, I guess, that's need for that at least a few meetings a month where you're going to be doing it in person. And I just wanted to add that for the things that are on the weekends, like councillor surgeries, residents' organisations, community events, you are in a ward with typically 3 councillors. I think we have a couple of 2-member wards, but typically 3 councillors. And what I found in my own ward of Lee Green is that we're very supportive of each other. So if it is a community thing and someone has to work or has caring responsibilities or something in their personal life, we try to kind of operate on a kind of where when one of us are there, all of us are kind of there. If it's a community thing, we all try to go, but if we can't, we make sure that one of us goes and then briefs the others. And so there is that sort of collegial aspect of things. You're not in this on your own completely. You're working in a ward with 2 colleagues, and there is an ability to split the workload as well, especially when it comes to casework as well in that way. So there is that aspect of things too.
Yeah, good point. So on the workload side of it, this is a sort of sample of some of the work that you would be expected to do. So casework, that can come in via surgery. As I already mentioned, I know that lots of you have come out on the doorstep with us, so you know that we take casework also as part of our doorstep conversations that we have with residents. But the majority of casework will typically come in through email. Preparing for meetings, and depending on what committee you're on, that can really vary. So there will always be papers for whichever meeting you're preparing for. So it could be planning, it could be housing select committee, it could be full council. There will be papers that you are expected to read, and that some of those papers can be really, really lengthy. I know that when I first got my first sort of few sets of papers through, I was just like, wow, this is 400 pages. So it can be really, really long. What I would say to that is that once you've been on a committee for a while, and if you don't sort of change your committees every year, then you kind of, how the papers function, the format, the key things that you need to look for. And I can say that over time, reading your papers, you will become more efficient. And you'll sort of know the key things that you need to look out for according to your committee. Also, I think you can sort of, on certain committees, if you're not the chair, because if you're a chair, you have to sort of take an interest in everything. But say, for example, I also sit on sustainable development. There are particular items that I will read in greater detail, or maybe do some additional research on, because those are particular items that I find particularly interesting or that I've got background knowledge on. So I might go into a little bit more detail, as I say, and then go off piste and sort of read, other sources around that particular topic. We may be involved in organising different community events. So I, for example, I don't organise these, but I'm quite well involved with one of our community organisations in Brockley that look after the gardens by Brockley Station. So I sort of I go along to sort of their events. I don't get involved in organising. I think they'd love me to get involved in organising, but I will sort of attend events with them, help at their Christmas market, things like that. So there are those community events. You may be asked to be involved in the CLP organisation. So I did the transition work. I was transition secretary when we had the boundary changes. So I've sort of worked with the CLP to establish the new organisation. And campaigning. So you might need to sort of be involved in organising the campaigning or organising around sort of leaflets, or getting members to help out with leaflet deliveries, or doing leaflet drops to different members to sort of to get campaigning sessions organised. Have I missed anything on that, Jack or Essie?
No, I think you summarized it really well. I kind of just wanted to say that there are all these things, and it's right that it's called the hidden workload, because these are the sort of things that kind of take up a lot of that sort of mental load, and they take a bit of time to get used to. Certainly casework, certainly papers. When you mentioned the papers and the length, I thought that was absolutely right. But I think it's like any new job, I guess, that you're starting, it's going to be quite overwhelming for some time. And I think what I tried to do was just to sort of lean into that and not try to push myself to go faster or know more than I could at the time. And I'm now third year in, kind of feeling like I found my feet. But I think just kind of being kind to yourself and understanding that a lot of people are either going to be in the same boat or they have been in the same boat and are willing to be as supportive as possible. And there's a lot of support when you're kind of first brought in from the council in terms of how to be a councillor. So I would say just to remember that. And also that kind of similar to the point I made earlier, you don't have to go to everything. I think it's important to remember that you need to have a personal life and your private time and your time to recharge. So of course, you do your casework, you prepare for your meetings, but when there's some flexibility, like community events, as I said, you've got people and colleagues in your ward, maybe you pick one event that you really want to go to, one thing that you're really interested in. As Shana said, she's got, the park by Brockley Station. I've got in my ward an organisation called Fuss, and they organise a Christmas fair and a spring fair, and I like to really get involved with that. And we also do some litter picking. So we pick the things that we really kind of are excited by in our wards, and we try to, divide and conquer. But yeah, I think the hidden workload is real.
Definitely. Doesn't look like Jack has anything to add there. So maybe I'll ask Jack to sort of take the lead on this slide.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got together and just thought, what would our top tips be to somebody maybe that was about to become a councillor and is working full time? And we came up with this list over 3 slides. So the first one we put down there was to plan ahead and try and set aside time to read papers. You might know that you have a committee meeting on Wednesday night at 7 p.m, but you've got to try and identify some time when you're actually going to read the papers to prepare for that meeting. So, what I do is I tend to, maybe on a Sunday evening, suits me, I sort of look ahead to the week and kind of think about all this stuff, map out when in the week I can find some time to read those papers. I think a really important point, which Sian has emphasised quite well a few times, is picking your committees wisely. So you will be asked to express what sort of committees you'd like to be on. And often you find that you end up on committees that will be your first or second choices. And there definitely are some committees that require a lot more preparation than others. Now, I remember getting my first pack of papers for a planning committee, and I was completely shocked. At that point, they all arrived to me in paper form, and it was this absolutely massive document containing really detailed stuff about planning application. And it does take, being realistic, hours and hours to prepare for a planning committee meeting. So, if you are worried about your workload, just talk to people about what committees perhaps to choose to be on. You don't have to be on planning, for example. However, if you're really interested in planning, I made it work, working full time as a teacher. So, I hope I'm not putting everyone off particular committees as well. But you just need to be aware that different committees come with different workloads. The third bullet point on there, make sure that you do keep a diary. Now, I use my council Outlook calendar for loads of things, and I just make sure that when I commit to something, I do pop it in that calendar. So yeah, when I'm looking ahead to the week, I can see what I've got to tackle. Look ahead and allocate time to prepare for meetings. It's not just about reading papers. There might be a Labour group on a Monday evening and there's a particular point that you want to raise or get across. You might want to just do just a small amount of preparation for that. This next one I think is super helpful. There's a lot of choice about the number of committees that you go on as well. And I would really recommend that you avoid over-committing to too many committees. You know, when you get your AGM packs, it might be quite tempting to think, oh, I'd love to be on planning, I'd love to learn more about that, or I'd love to be on appointments committee, and I'd also love to be on health and safety committee. There's so many that you could choose to be on, but every time you commit to being on a committee, you're kind of committing to quite a significant amount of workload. So you might in your first year just want to think about putting yourself down for the minimum number of committees. But of course, it's totally up to you. I didn't do that. I think I slightly overcommitted in my first year, but I did make it work, and I also really enjoyed it. Depending on your home life, your personal situation, just think about who can help you, and/or how can you organise your home life differently. And that's going to look different for everyone on this call. But we all bring our own family situations that we need to manage. And if you are going to become a councillor, there are going to be a lot of evening meetings. So just have a think in advance about how you might be able to make that work. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, so I added that last bullet point. So this is something that, you know, I certainly found tricky initially because, you know, I could go straight from work to an evening meeting, and then I've got to sort of make sure there's food on the table for my children and things like that. So it's just about sort of, you know, how can you sort of juggle those things? But they get older, and I can tell you right now, I can smell the food that my son is currently cooking in the kitchen. So it can actually be really good for home life as well, in the sense that, you know, different people can step up and maybe spread their wings and take a little bit of responsibility for themselves. Can we have the next slide, please, Jack? So I'll do this one, I think, and then I'll hand over to Essie for the final slide of top tips. So I think it's really important that you build good relationships with your co-counsellors. So we do this in Brockley. We divide, for example, we met initially very early on to sort of decide how we're going to manage casework. And I'm so fortunate in my co-counsellor, Steve, because he was already a counsellor when I was new, but he was also a housing solicitor. So he agreed that he would deal with housing casework that came in. I had quite a strong sort of environmental background, so I said, okay, I'll deal with anything environmental that comes in, and Aisha was going to deal with sort of community groups and things like that. So we divided our work in that way. So and we try to sort of speak with each other regularly and check in with each other. But beyond just your sort of ward co-counsellors, there are other counsellors around you. You know, there's a lot of us in Labour group, and you can form some really strong relationships with people, and that can sort of really be a source of strength, which I think Essie has mentioned. Do send apologies to things that you can't make, but also try to ensure that your council attendance remains high. And this year I've had some bad health in February and March, and I can honestly say I'm quite glad that I've, generally speaking, kept my attendance really high, because I was really unwell, and I did actually, very unusually for me, miss 2 sustainable development meetings in February and March, which was completely unavoidable. Everybody understood. I did attend one online, but if you've sort of not got great attendance anyway, then when you do really need to sort of take that time off because you physically can't get out of bed, then you need that to fall back on essentially. I've already mentioned the strategy that we use jointly in Broccoli for managing casework, but you still sort of have things coming into your inbox individually. So you need to sort of try to find a way of doing that. I know that some people like to do it once or twice or 3 times a week in big chunks, or maybe do it sort of on the go. I know some people like to do it on their phone, so they'll do it almost constantly and they'll just sort of clear things instantly as they come in and maybe pass it on to a colleague or send it off to the relevant authority and just do it like that. The times when I tend to work the best is when I sort of get up in the morning and before I go to work, I just do even just half an hour on my council inbox, and you can sort of get through that quite quickly then. Sometimes you might need time off from the day job to attend something for council. This is something that you're legally allowed to ask for, actually. And there is a government recommendation that employers do allow you time to do that. So you can look that up if you ever need to. Hopefully none of your employers would require that of you. Hopefully everybody's employer would be understanding of those requests. So just try to get those in and book those in advance if you know they're coming up. And I think we have our final slide now. And I'll hand this chunky one over to Essie.
Thank you, Sian. Yes, I think this is actually a really good one. An SRA, I can't remember what it stands for. It's basically a special allowance. Do you remember what it stands for? They are
Responsibility allowance.
Thank you. See, teamwork. That's how it goes. A special responsibility allowance post. This is basically you get a small allowance for being a councillor, and then if you are the chair of a committee, you're on cabinet, you get a kind of an additional allowance because of the extra responsibility. So I think a tip would be not to rush into trying to go for one of these posts too soon. Basically, as soon as you're elected your first year, I mean, it can work. People have done it, but you're kind of trying to find your feet. You're trying to learn about the council, how everything works, and it just adds a level. It can add a level of pressure to a job that can already be quite stressful. So something to consider, not rushing into that too soon, because it can mean that your time is eaten up even more considerably than it would be just by being a regular backbencher. And in your first year, that can be quite overwhelming. Second point, yes, stay connected to your branch, people who elected you, people who will be championing you and believing you, in the most, and kind of wanting to support you within your ward. I always find going to Lee Green branch meetings and events, it feels very it feels really nice and supportive, and you tend to have, your strongest connections in your branch in terms of the community. So that's always a nice, that's kind of a nice and hopefully an easy one to do. And in a similar vein, stay connected to your co-councillors. I think I've been very lucky in Lee Green, a bit like Sian when I joined. There was one councillor in my ward who had already been a councillor for a term for 4 years. So he was very experienced and could kind of show us the ropes and took the lead on some things. And then it was 2 new councillors, myself and my colleague Ava. So we kind of fell into a rhythm of working with each other. We get on quite well. It's a work relationship like any other. You have to kind of foster it and be polite and be respectful. Even though you're working strange hours and going to events and often socializing together, I think it is important to remember that it is a work relationship and to kind of nurture it as you would any other work relationship. The next 2 I think I'll take together because I think they're quite important and linked to something that I was saying a bit earlier. There's learning to say no, try not to take on too much, and also prioritizing time for yourself, your family, and your friends. So this is not voluntary work that we do, but it's kind of really, it's adjacent to that. You're serving your community. You're doing it because you want to, not because you have to. You want to give back. Those are all noble, things to feel and to want to do. But at the end of the day, you can't kind of, as the saying goes, pour from an empty cup. And it is the kind of, and I know this from being a journalist, I kind of, that experience has been very useful for me in this. Everything can feel like an emergency sometimes because if it's casework or it's many events you've got to go to, it's meetings, it's briefings, it can become quite a lot. And I think it's important to know what is you need to do, and then what's nice to do, and then what you can do or what maybe someone else can do, and try to say no to some things in order to allow yourself to say yes to other things, which might be personal things like seeing your family, seeing your friends, nurturing those personal relationships that will kind of restore you and allow you to kind of keep going for longer. So I think it's important as in any workplace to make sure that you've got some semblance of a work-life balance and that you're taking time for yourself so that you don't feel burned out or too stressed, and it helps you to be more resilient, I think. The next kind of point is about setting an automatic reply for emails, which I do all the time. I've got an ordinary kind of auto reply to any email I get, even when I'm around, just to say that I work full time and that it may take me some time to get back to you. And then if I go on leave, I set up a special out of office that will say I'm away from this date to this date. So I think that's just expectation management. I think it's important for your residents, for your colleagues within the council, just to kind of have a sense of how accessible you are, because I think it is important in this role that people kind of know when they can reach you, how long it will take, that kind of thing, that you're always ensuring that you're accessible when you're around and not on leave, that you're accessible to a certain degree, and that people kind of know about that. Okay, the second to last one. I like this, Sean. So do what works for you ultimately. You do you, as I think Gen Z are saying maybe. Sean carries 2 laptops everywhere. Okay, I don't know. That sounds like a very kind of good way to do it. I don't know, I feel bad for your shoulders or back, I'm not sure, but as long as it works. I'm trying to think, have I got an unconventional thing that I do? Not unconventional, but I mean I do all my work on my phone, which they're not huge, but I reply to all my emails, I draft everything. I just find it more mobile for me. And I've got one of my colleagues in Lee Green does the complete opposite, never on the phone, but always on the laptop. And so just finding things that work for you. Maybe it's coming to the Civic Suite to work, or I don't know, something. But yeah, figure out how you can make the role, work for you and your in your life and the things that you enjoy, and do it that way. And and that links into the final point about finding things that interest you in the council. Like anything, passion is what carries you through, because there are some very long meetings, long meetings. There are some very difficult, things that you get through casework, very emotional, very hard to solve. And it can be, it can be a lot in some ways. And I think it's the passion that you have for service, it's the interest that you have in local government and how it works that will kind of carry you through. So if you find that thing that interests you, and you do some research into it, you turn it into a task and finish group, you sit on a committee about it, you go to briefings about it, that kind of thing will make you will keep you grateful that you're doing this, and will fuel your passion for being a local councillor. So I think I'll stop there.